Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I want to do another round of recent horror reads focusing on some of the backlist titles I have been consuming. I think I have a good variety in this list, so without further ado, let's get started. First, I read a book called The Shining by Stephen King, which you probably heard of because it is an iconic classic book. And this, of course, is about a man named Jack who gets a job working as a manager of a hotel during the winter season. So he takes his family up north and they go to live at the hotel and things get crazy from there. I went into this with very low expectations because I've said so many times I am not a fan of haunted houses, or in this case haunted hotel stories, but I was pleased the fact that the story was more about the family than the haunting of the hotel itself, and so it actually worked out a lot better than I thought. It's more of a psychological horror as you watch Jack go crazy, and you also get to learn about his son's ability that they call the Shining, and I really liked reading from his perspective. I'm not always a fan of stories that have a child with psychic type abilities in horror, but in this case it actually worked really well and I was very much intrigued. If I had one complaint, it's the same complaint I have about pretty much every Stephen King book, and that's the fact that I felt it could have been edited down to be a stronger story, which is probably why everyone tells me to read his novellas and short story collection, so I will do that, I promise. But otherwise, I was very glad to finally check it out, understand the references. I do want to watch the movie now because I went in without watching the movie first, so I knew very little about the plot, and I will report back when I've seen the movie. But otherwise, I liked it, I'm intrigued and curious about reading Dr. Sleep, so I'd love to know your opinions on that down below, if it's worth continuing on and reading the semi-sequel to the story. But overall, I enjoyed it. If you haven't checked it out, I think it's worth it just because it is such a classic of the horror genre that gets referenced everywhere, and I'm glad that I finally know where all those references are coming from. After that, I read a book called Blanky by Kealan Burke. This is a novella, so it's actually quite short, and it follows a man who has recently lost his 9-month-old daughter, and as a result is of course grieving immensely, and his marriage has broken down as a result. And so this story follows him while he is wandering around his house, and one day he wanders into the daughter's old nursery and finds her blanket sitting on the floor, which seems strange because he believed that it was lost or packed up or ended up at the hospital and never returned. So it seems strange to him that the blanket is now back, but from there the story starts to wind up. And I will say that Kealan Burke does an amazing job capturing grief. I thought that the emotions in this book that it brought up were so vivid, and I really felt for the characters. I do have to give a warning to young parents because this book certainly can hit on some really sensitive buttons if you're someone who has a young infant child that is still in that range for SIDS and other infant mortality, because oh my goodness, I read this while bottle feeding my son at night and the waterworks started. And this is coming from someone who does not cry at books. I say that I'm not an emotional reader. I've cried at a book once before. If you're interested, that was The Fault in Our Stars. And this is only the second time I can remember ever crying at a book. And that says a lot for me because I'm so emotionless. So I think that this book will really hit you hard. If you are a young, anxious parent, you might want to steer away from this until your kids are a little bit older. But I do personally recommend this to parents because I think that you will get the most out of the story. I think you will connect most with the narrative. But certainly the idea of grief, losing a baby, I think is a pretty universally understandable idea. So you don't need to be a parent to enjoy this. I just think parents will enjoy it that much more. So overall, I enjoyed this one. I didn't think it was particularly scary, which isn't always a fault of a book. It just wasn't terrifying. And if I had one complaint that kept it from being a 5-star read, it would be the ending. I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll say that it was a very classic horror ending that I've read one too many times, and it did let me down a little bit because I was hoping this would be another favorite from Burke, but it ended up being just a really good 4-star read that I would still absolutely recommend. I thought it was very well done, very well written, and well worth checking out. Finally, I read a book called The Night Parade by Ronald Malfi, and this is a piece of apocalyptic horror that is set in a world where an infection of unknown origin is spreading. It is causing people to hallucinate and then eventually to die. The story particularly follows a man and his young daughter who are on the run. You find out that his wife has died, and he is now trying to protect his daughter by running from the medical institutions that is trying to take care of them and do tests on his daughter. You find out very early on that she has some kind of supernatural abilities, and that gets worked into the story. I think that it was very captivating. I think Ronald Malfi is a very talented storyteller because I did get pulled into the story quite a bit, despite the fact that this particular subgenre of apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic horror is not my favorite. So the fact that I enjoyed it this much, I think says a lot about him as an author. I am not always a fan of supernatural abilities that work into horror stories, so that was a little bit of a negative for me, but other people might enjoy that a lot more than I did. Otherwise, it was a very fast read, very addicting, and I read it on audio, which always helps my enjoyment. If I had a complaint, it's the fact that it was very predictable. If you have read apocalyptic horror before, you basically know where this one is going to go, and I was able to predict most of the twists and turns. And otherwise, it was enjoyable, and I would recommend it if you're a huge fan of this genre. It's a good one to check out. It reminded me a lot of The Fireman by Joe Hill, so if you like that one, you might want to check out this. But I thought it was a good read, but not overwhelmingly amazing. It's not one that I'm going to be thinking about over the years, but regardless, I do want to read more by Ronald Malfi. I've only read one other book by him, and that was Snow. So if you have recommendations of what I should check out from him next, I'd love to know that down below. So that's it for this quick round of recent reads. Of the 3 books I mentioned, I'd love to know which one are you planning on checking out for yourself. And if you've already read one, I would love to hear your opinions down below. Do you agree, disagree with my own thoughts? Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.